You mentioned just a little bit ago, you said it's been a while since you've identified as like a capital L libertarian, and I was like, yes, I can't wait to talk about this because this was one of the main things I wanted to discuss. But yeah, and you talked about how you've leaned away from the capitalist side, and you're kind of working through some of your own thoughts on that. But um, can you expound on maybe what were some of the things that caused you to think differently about like that side of libertarianism, or even just like capitalism and the socioeconomic system at large, if that makes sense?
Sure. Um, a lot of my political thought developed in accordance with discovering libertarianism as a teenager, which is pretty cliche, but like, yeah, and thankfully I never was enabled to be maximum cringe by like finding Ayn Rand and
Oh,
being like, I'm a Randian. Like that was never my vibe. But I
gotcha.
found
Yeah.
some like geared for high school or libertarian books that were kind of like common sense approaches to both like a political compass divide sort of way of why why it's better to be permissive in the economic axis and why it's better to be
Mm.
permissive in the social axis.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and one of the is it kind of sort of engaging and getting down to the sort of like axiomatic level of what is what does it mean to or like what are the ultimate things at which we're driving, like what is the greatest good or whatever. And for sort of a secular approach to libertarianism, there doesn't seem to be any non-arbitrary stopping point before you get to anarchism.
Mm.
And I sort of take an a priori approach to anarchism, or a although I could just as easily take one that's more pragmatic and just say anarchism just plain doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Though I'm sure lots of people would disagree, but the because I think that I know my destination isn't going to be anarchism, and I don't see any way that the sort of um, base ideas that lead to capital L libertarianism should stop. I'm like, well, I have to choose some other base thing. So now I just kind of describe myself as a minarchist, or
Mm.
someone who's just aiming for as little government as possible, minimal archy. Um,
Yeah.
and talking as far as what kind of started to jade me over hypercapitalism is the degree to which corporations will tend to take advantage of government, and they would just find their way in bed together. And it's very, I don't see an easy way to remedy
Mm.
that sort of predilection. I had one friend remark to me in college. He was like, well, societies historically only ever get less free accepting the point of revolution.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's a really depressing thought, that like you can try to basically set up a slow decline as slow as you want to as the founders, and then but it's only ever going to decline, which is until people get fed up with it and some generation says we're breaking down the system as a whole. Um,
Right.
but the idea that what people might say, well, that's not real capitalism, that's corporatism. I'll be like, yes, but how can you successfully instantiate, how can you successfully make a system that is pure capitalist, that won't corrode over time and devolve into corporatism? Like, you even have
Mm-hmm.
1800s, I forget what company it was, but they had the National Guard come out to put down a worker strike, which is key. The ability of the workers to strike is an intrinsic part of the even playing field that capitalism seeks to impose, and saying that all our work, like if you don't like the working conditions you're under, then leave.
Mm-hmm.
If the company is going to get the government to come in with guns until you can't leave, well then you're you're not really you're misplaced if you're trying to defend the company in that situation. It's no longer you're it's the power imbalance that you're bringing in, and now it's far more nefarious. They're not companies aren't calling the government in with guns. They're just regulating the little guys out of business.
Right. I couldn't agree more. I feel like that was an amazing just description of this the seemingly inevitable downfall that some of these kind of cultural forces and just governmental forces have, and just like you said, the critical weak spots in the capitalist system. I'm glad you touched on minarchism too, because I think something that I've seen in increasing numbers in both capital L and just regular, I guess, lowercase l libertarian circles is a lot of the libertarians that I both respect and just try to learn from is they have shifted, like you mentioned, into a more minarchist view. And I think the reason that we don't hear more about that often is I think libertarianism is still seen as, for lack of a better term, like the gateway drug into like minarchism and just anarchy and just a lot of other kind of freedom-minded ideologies in general. And it's interesting because it's like minarchism and libertarianism are not the same, but I think people just kind of use it somewhat in a lazy way to be like, we still want people to talk about like liberty, but we're not going to kind of put minarchism out there in the front. And to me that makes sense from one angle, because it's like most people I think have a skewed perception of what anarchy is in general. You hear most people hear the word anarchy and they just think like massive lawlessness and just like depravity of the worst kind, and it's like that's not what it is, and that's not what people intend for it to be. So I think libertarianism is kind of just this softer, more palatable way of describing similar principles in a way that people seem to gravitate towards more often. But